Bud Not Buddy, written by Christopher Paul Curtis. Have you ever wondered what life would be like on your own? You'd get to eat whatever you want, go to sleep whenever you want, do whatever you want, right? In Bud Not Buddy, 10-year-old Bud Caldwell is on his own, but life alone isn't as fun as it seems. Bud Caldwell's mother died when he was just 6 years old, leaving him with nothing but a cardboard suitcase filled with memories and a possible hint of who his father may be. Now Bud lives among the homeless in Flint, Michigan, until he decides to walk the Grand Rapids in search of his father. Bud begins his journey to find his father. He has a few Herman Calloway band flyers and a few rocks his mother gave him. He carries these prized possessions everywhere he goes. He believes Herman Calloway to be his father. Bud got an idea that those flyers will lead him to his father. Once he decides to hit the road to find this mystery man, nothing can stop him. Not hunger, not fear, not vampires, and not even Herman E. Calloway himself. Being on your own during the Great Depression sounds like one of the worst things that can happen to a kid, especially if you are a young African American boy in a very racist place. The time period that this book takes place in is during the Great Depression in 1936. The Great Depression began in October 1929 when the stock market in the United States dropped rapidly. Thousands of investors lost large sums of money, and many were wiped out, lost everything. The crash led us into the Great Depression. The subsequent period ranked as the longest and worst period of high unemployment and low business activity in modern times. Banks, stores, and factories were closed and left millions of Americans jobless, homeless, and penniless. Many people came to depend on the government or charity to provide them with food. The Depression became a worldwide business slump of the 1930s that affected almost all nations. It led to a sharp decrease in world trade as each country tried to protect their own industries and products by raising tariffs on imported goods. In the United States, President Herbert Hoover held office when the Great Depression began. The economy continued to slump almost every month. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected as president in 1932. Roosevelt's New Deal reforms gave the government more power and helped ease the Depression. The Depression ended as nations increased their production of war materials and the start of World War II. This increased production provided jobs and put large amounts of money back into circulation. Jazz was very popular in the 1930s. The earliest roots of jazz are in the community music of African daily life. Members of communities would dance, sing, and clap. Although the big bands and famous musicians mostly played in large cities, smaller bands like Herman E. Calloway's and Bud Not Buddy brought the sounds of jazz and swing to small towns across America. People found it entertaining. Jazz music made it easier for the time considering it was during the Great Depression. Throughout the book, Bud carried around flyers for the band Herman E. Calloway and the Dusky Devastators of the Depression. They were described as masters of the new jazz. This group of people created jazz music and performed it to serve as entertainment to people. Herman E. Calloway is the main musician in the band and is who Bud is searching for. Will he make his way to find the band and Herman E. Calloway? The setting of Bud Not Buddy takes place in Flint, Michigan, which is where Bud lives, and in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Bud travels to. The Great Depression of the 1930s affected Michigan more severely than many other places because of its industrial base. In Bud Not Buddy, the community Bud grew up in is pretty poor because jobs were hard to find during the Great Depression. Bud is both poor and homeless. He shows us how not having access to money for food or shelter can be a scary thing. See how he makes it through living in Flint, Michigan during this tough time in history. In the 1930s, when you traveled somewhere far, you typically took the train. This was the main form of transportation at this time. The railroads were economical for people to afford, and it got them where they needed to go. The railroads hired men to work who were called Pullman porters. These men were former slaves who didn't have many work options. They worked for tips to help accommodate passengers who were traveling on the train. Later, young African American men joined to work as Pullman porters as well. In Bud Not Buddy, Bud meets a man on there who he forms a relationship with. How does he help Bud on the railroads? Does he help him get to Grand Rapids? Hooverville was a small town just outside of Flint where Bud lived. This was where all the poor people with little clothing, food, and supplies lived. These people lived in homes made of cardboard. As the Depression worsened and millions of urban and rural families lost their jobs, they also lost their homes. Desperate for shelter, homeless citizens built these homes in and around cities across the nation. These camps came to be called Hoovervilles after the president. These homes were constructed of cardboard, tar paper, glass, lumber, and tin, or whatever other materials people could salvage. Unemployed masons used cast-off stones and bricks to build these. Cardboard box homes did not last long, and most dwellings were in a constant state of being rebuilt. Some homes were not buildings at all, but deep holes dug in the ground with a makeshift roof laid over it to keep out inclement weather. Will Bud encounter a Hooverville on his journey? Bud Not Buddy is a book you will be sure to love. It will take you through an exciting journey of Bud's life and make you wonder what he will do next. Follow his courageous journey across Michigan during the Great Depression. How does Bud manage to go on alone? Will Bud find his father? Will Bud finally find a real home and be loved? You'll have to read Bud Not Buddy to find out.